Hello, dear dreamer. Tonight, we leave behind the noise, the rush of the day, the glowing screens, the endless to-do lists. They're not welcome here. You've found a quiet space now, a place where stories bloom like stars in the dark, where time slows down and the only thing that matters is the sound of your breathing and the gentle world we're about to enter. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it out. Again, slower this time. Feel the weight lift from your shoulders as your body sinks just a little deeper into your bed. Now picture this. A candle flickers softly in a distant castle window. A forest hums with wind and birdsong. A tower rises far above the clouds. And a girl, kind, curious, or brave, waits for her story to begin. Tonight, we'll visit the stories of princesses, not just the dresses and ballrooms, but the quiet places their hearts live, the dreams they whispered alone, the hope they held on to, even when no one else saw it. These are stories you may know, but tonight, we'll tell them slower, softer, with all the little details left in, the moments between moments, the soft creak of floorboards in a quiet cottage, the breeze that carries a lantern skyward, the warm touch of a friend's hand in the dark. Whether you're here to sleep or simply rest, you don't need to do anything. You don't even need to listen closely. Let the words come and go like waves. Let your mind drift wherever it wants to go. If you fall asleep halfway through a story, that's perfectly okay. That just means your body trusted the journey, and the stories will still be here, waiting for you, next time. So tonight, we'll visit a glass slipper lost at midnight, a ballroom hidden deep in a cursed castle, a glowing flower trapped in a high tower, a seashell voice beneath the ocean, and a quiet girl who sang to the stars, even when the forest stood still. Each of these princesses held a piece of the night inside them, and as we travel through their worlds, you might feel a little more calm, a little more held, a little more ready to dream. Are you ready? Then close your eyes and we'll begin. Once upon a time, in a quiet corner of the kingdom, there stood a house with ivy curling up the stones, and inside it lived a girl who swept ashes with her bare hands. She was called Cinderella, not because it was her name, but because every night she fell asleep by the fireplace, covered in the soft gray dust of the cinders. Her real name had long faded like a lullaby, the kind you hum once, then forget. Her stepmother said it wasn't important. Her stepsisters never asked. But the birds outside still sang for her. The mice still followed her with tiny bright eyes. And every morning, when the sunlight spilled across the kitchen tiles, Cinderella whispered to herself, as if reminding her heart who she was, "I'm still here." Her days were filled with chores, dusting shelves, scrubbing floors, hauling buckets of water so heavy they made her arms ache for hours after sunset. But in between, she dreamed. She dreamed while folding linens in the attic, where the ceiling creaked and the wind slipped through the cracks. She dreamed while peeling potatoes in the warmth of the kitchen, with her animal friends curled up nearby, blinking slowly. And at night, when the house was quiet and only the crackle of burning logs filled the silence, she would sit beside the fireplace, fingers wrapped around a chipped teacup, and look into the flames like they were a crystal ball. What did she dream of? Not riches, not fame, just something different. A night with stars overhead, a dance, a voice that said her name kindly, someone who saw her, not as a servant, but as someone who mattered. And one day, that night came. It began with a letter, a golden-edged invitation from the royal palace. The prince was hosting a grand ball. Every maiden in the kingdom was welcome. Cinderella's heart leapt. It was silly, she knew. But for a moment the world seemed brighter. She rushed to tell her stepmother, her voice breathless with hope. I'd like to go to the ball. The room went silent. Then, the laughter. Cold, cruel, echoing. You? Her stepsister sneered. In that dress? The other one added. Cinderella's hands instinctively smoothed the front of her apron. The fabric was clean, simple, not royal, but still hers. Her stepmother's voice cut through like ice. If, and only if, you finish your chores and can find something suitable to wear. They all knew that meant no. Still she tried. She found an old gown of her mother's tucked away in a wooden trunk, faded, but full of memory. She mended the tears, sewed on ribbon, let the mice add their touches too, buttons, sashes, sparkles. And just before the sun set, she looked into the mirror. For the first time in years, she looked like herself. But when she stepped into the room, their envy turned to rage. They tore it, the sash, the sleeves, the memories. Gone in moments. She didn't cry, not at first. She just ran, out the back door, into the garden, through the hedges and past the fountain. And there, under a tree older than time, she finally wept. The stars blinked above her, but said nothing. Then a shimmer, a breeze, and a woman in silver appeared from the night itself. Her voice was soft as falling petals. Why are you crying, child? Cinderella wiped her cheeks. Her voice shook. I had a dream, but it was silly. Dreams are never silly, the woman said, especially the ones that live in silence. She smiled, held up her hand, and with a flick, sparkles danced in the air like snowflakes made of light. The pumpkin in the garden turned into a golden carriage dot the mice, into horses with glistening manes dot the tattered gown, now shimmered with threads of moonlight and stardust. It was more beautiful than anything Cinderella had ever imagined, but she still hesitated. Why are you helping me? She whispered. Because tonight, the woman said, you will be seen. She handed her a single slipper, delicate, crystal clear, cool to the touch. Leave by midnight, she warned. The magic will fade. Cinderella nodded, eyes wide with wonder. The horses neighed softly. The carriage door swung open. She stepped inside, her heart beating like a drum wrapped in velvet. The ride to the castle was slow, dreamlike. The wheels barely touched the ground. The sky stretched wide above her, and for the first time, the moon didn't feel so far away. When she arrived, every torch in the castle courtyard seemed to flicker brighter, as if the world itself had paused to let her in. And when she stepped into the ballroom, it was like walking into a dream made real. The floors glistened like mirrors. Chandeliers floated above like upside-down constellations. Music poured through the air like warm honey. And then his eyes met hers. The prince didn't ask who she was. He didn't question her dress or her name, or the way she hesitated at the stairs. He simply smiled, offered his hand, and said, "May I have this dance?" They danced, and danced, and danced, as if the world had fallen away, as if they were the only two people left beneath the stars. She laughed, not a quiet laugh hidden behind her hand, but a full one, the kind that only comes from being fully seen. And in that moment, Cinderella wasn't a servant. She wasn't the girl in ashes. She was simply her. But then, the bell. A single chime, then 2, then 3. 12 was coming. She gasped, pulled away, ran. Down the staircase, the slipper slipping from her foot, but she couldn't stop. By the time she reached the carriage, the world was unraveling. Horses turned back to mice. The gown faded to rags. The magic, gone. But she was smiling, because now, the dream wasn't just in her head. Someone had seen her. Someone had held her hand, and never once looked away. The next morning, the castle was full of questions. Servants whispered, Guards murmured, and the prince stood still in the middle of the ballroom holding something small and sparkling. A slipper? So delicate, so clear. It looked like it had been made from frozen light. She vanished, he told his advisor. No name, no title, just this. He didn't care about lineage, or gowns, or rules. He cared about the feeling, the way she'd looked at him like he was a person, not a crown. The sound of her laugh when they spun across the marble floor. The way her hand fit in his. So he made a vow. Find her, he said. I'll know her by this slipper. And so, the search began. Across every town, every cobbled street and flower-covered cottage, the royal messenger rode with guards in tow, the slipper, protected in velvet, waiting for the foot it belonged to. Back at the chateau, Cinderella returned to her quiet life. She didn't tell the mice what happened. They already knew. They'd seen her eyes, and how far away they were when she stirred the morning porridge. She folded sheets, swept floors. But inside, something was different. The world had seen her, and more importantly, she had seen herself. Meanwhile, her stepsisters prepared like the world was ending. New dresses, new shoes. They even tried walking on their toes to make their feet look daintier. It must fit me, one said. It will fit me, said the other. They did not consider that it might belong to someone else. And then, a knock. The royal escort had arrived. Cinderella was locked in the attic. A key turned. The bolt slid into place. She heard the clatter of heels on wood, the rustle of silks as the slipper was presented. She heard grunts of pain as each stepsister tried to force it on, to bend, to shrink, to shove. But the slipper stayed silent. It did not bend. It did not lie. It simply waited. And just when they were about to give up, a voice drifted down the staircase. May I try? The stepmother stiffened. No one else lives here. But the guard had heard, and when the door was opened, Cinderella stepped out. Not in a gown, not with a crown, but with her head held high and a quiet hope blooming in her eyes. They laughed, they sneered. But the guard knelt and presented the slipper. She sat down slowly. The mice gathered at her feet. The wind paused outside the window. And when she slipped her foot in, it fit as if it had always belonged. No struggle, no pain, just truth. The silence that followed was like the air before a sunrise, still, sacred. Then came the sound of hooves. The carriage was waiting. The stepsisters blinked. The stepmother turned pale. And Cinderella? She turned once and smiled, not cruelly, not with triumph, but with peace, as if to say, I forgive you, but I won't stay. She climbed into the carriage, the velvet wrapping around her like a hug. And as the wheels rolled down the path, she closed her eyes and listened to the world exhale. At the castle gates, the prince waited, not with a crown, not with a speech, just a quiet hope of his own. When she stepped down, his face lit up, not with surprise, but with recognition. There you are, he whispered. And that was it. No grand declarations, no royal decree, just two people who saw each other fully in a world that often didn't bother to look. The wedding wasn't a lavish affair. It was joyful, yes, filled with music and garden roses and twinkling lights. But what made it special was how simple it felt. A dress that shimmered like dew, laughter that echoed through stone halls, dancing barefoot under lanterns. Even the mice had front row seats. And after the guests had gone, after the stars had risen, Cinderella stood on the castle balcony, her hands resting on the railing, the night breeze brushing against her cheeks. She didn't need magic anymore. She didn't need to be transformed. She was still her. The same girl who once dreamed beside a fireplace, now dreaming in the open, under the whole sky. and the prince came to stand beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They just looked at each other as the moonlight wrapped them in silver, and together they watched the kingdom sleep. But the story doesn't end there, because Cinderella never forgot where she came from. She returned to the chateau one last time, not to seek revenge, not to gloat, but to gather the things that mattered. She found the old gown tucked away in a chest. She let the mice find cozy corners in the castle. She planted flowers in the ashes of the old hearth, and she left behind the dust, without anger. Because she knew ashes are not the end. They're just what's left before something new begins. Sometimes we fall. We are stepped on, ignored, pushed aside. But sometimes, even in the quietest rooms, even with soot on our faces and splinters in our palms, magic listens. And when it does, it doesn't turn pumpkins into carriages. It turns the belief in our hearts into a door that finally opens. So if you ever feel small, if the world forgets your name, if the road ahead feels too long, remember her. The girl who swept the cinders. The girl who believed, even when no one else did. The girl who walked barefoot into a ballroom and changed everything with a single step. Sometimes it only takes one night. Sometimes it takes many. But your moment will come too. And when it does, it will fit just right. Just like the slipper. Now close your eyes. Let the magic stay a little longer. Let the story hum like a lullaby beneath your thoughts. And rest, knowing the next dream is just beginning. Once, in a small, quiet village tucked between green hills and early morning mist, there lived a girl who read books as if they were maps to other worlds. Her name was Belle. Most days, she walked with a woven basket in her arms, winding through cobbled streets and bakeries that smelled of warm sugar and cinnamon. The villagers greeted her, but never quite understood her. She's a lovely girl, they'd whisper, but so peculiar. She didn't mind, because when she opened a book, the world opened with it. Her mind wandered through enchanted forests, across kingdoms in far-off lands, into towers with secrets and pages filled with hope. In the mornings, she'd sit by the windowsills, unlight painting golden streaks across the floor. In the afternoons, she'd visit the small library in town, stacking books taller than her arms could carry. But what she loved most was reading the same stories over and over again, each time discovering something new. A sentence she had missed, a line that meant more this time, a quiet kind of magic. Still, beneath all those pages, lived a quiet longing to belong, to be seen, to live a life that meant something more than just ordinary days. And one day, that wish began its journey. It started with her father, Maurice, a gentle, eccentric man who built strange contraptions that coughed and spun and occasionally exploded with steam. He was on his way to a fair, a simple trip, a familiar road. But when his horse returned alone, Belle knew something was wrong. She followed the path, through tangled woods, past branches that reached like hands, into a night that fell too fast and too cold. And at the end of it all, a gate, iron wrought, twisted open like a question. Beyond it, a castle. But not the kind from her books. This one was alive. The walls sighed, the doors creaked like they'd been asleep for centuries, and shadows moved, not away from her, but with her. Belle found her father locked in a tower room, shivering, a prisoner. And before she could free him, a voice emerged from the dark. Low, wounded, not quite human. Leave, now. But Belle did something no one had done before. She looked, not with fear, not with pity, but with honesty. Take me instead, she said, her voice soft but unshaking. The beast, who had long forgotten what kindness even sounded like, was silent. Then he agreed. She became the castle's guest, or perhaps its prisoner. No one really knew. Her room was not a dungeon. It was warm, with tapestries and a soft bed. Books lined the walls. The windows opened to a moonlit garden where snowflakes landed like feathers. And slowly, very slowly, she began to explore. The castle did not welcome her at first. It watched. It waited. But Belle was not afraid of silence. She spoke to the furniture, not knowing they would one day speak back. She traced the carvings on the walls with her fingertips. She followed the flicker of candlelight down forgotten hallways. And in every room, she asked questions. She noticed things. A petal, falling, slowly. A mirror, hidden beneath velvet. A portrait torn in half. And a presence always near, always distant. The beast never said much. At first, he watched from shadows, then from across the table. Dinners that began in silence slowly bloomed into something more. One night, he asked her about her favorite book. She lit up. Pages poured from her like rain, her voice full of color and wonder. He listened, really listened, as if hearing stories for the first time. And then he showed her his library. Not a room, a cathedral of books, shelves that touched the clouds, staircases that spiraled into the stars. She gasped. He smiled, barely. "It's yours," he said, and walked away. That night, Belle did not sleep. She read, one book after another, under a velvet blanket, in the glow of a flickering lamp. She read of dragons and dreams and distant places with names she whispered like lullabies. And with each passing day, the castle softened. The walls echoed with her laughter. The mirrors fogged with warm breath. The beast, still gruff and clumsy, began to ask questions of his own. She told him about her mother, how she had loved roses, how her perfume used to fill the air long after she left a room. He shared almost nothing in return, but once, she caught him placing a rose in a vase outside her door. He didn't speak. He simply walked away. And that was enough. Winter came early to the castle that year. Snow blanketed the towers, softening the sharp corners of stone. Trees stood still under crystal frost, and the air smelled like chimney smoke and pine. Belle stood at the window in a golden cloak, watching flakes fall like powdered stardust. The beast was behind her, closer now. "Have you ever seen snow like this before?" she asked, not turning around. "No," he said quietly, "but I never looked at it like this." They spent hours outside, walking paths no one had walked in years, laughing as birds fluttered past, feeding crumbs to deer that wandered too close. He showed her the garden. She showed him how to make snow angels. He tried awkwardly, limbs too large. She giggled. And he smiled, really smiled, for the first time in a very, very long time. Later that evening, they had a snowball fight. He pretended to growl. She pretended to be afraid. Neither of them truly wanted it to end. Inside, the castle seemed to glow warmer. The candlesticks flickered brighter. The armoires hummed little lullabies under their breath. Everything was changing. Even the beast's voice, once thunderous, now soft like velvet. Even his hands, once clawed, now careful. Even his heart, once hidden, now slowly opening. But as the days passed, something else began to grow in Belle's chest. A worry, a quiet ache. Her father. Was he safe? Was he still searching? Did he think she had vanished? One night, she asked for the truth. The beast hesitated, then led her to the west wing, a room she had once been forbidden to enter. He showed her the mirror. It shimmered like moonlight over a still lake. "Show me my father," she whispered. The glass rippled. And there he was, Maurice, lost, cold, calling for help. Belle's hands flew to her mouth. I have to go to him. The beast's face tightened, but his voice did not argue. Then you must go, he said, and he placed the mirror gently in her palms. But the curse, a voice whispered behind the door. Let her go, he replied, not to them, but to himself. Because he loved her, and he would not cage the one thing that made him feel free. He watched her ride off into the snow, her cloak a blur of gold against the white. He did not cry, but the silence left behind felt louder than any storm. Belle found her father, half frozen in the woods. She brought him home, tucked him into warm blankets, held his hand. But the villagers had seen her, and the mirror. And one man in particular, Gaston, proud, angry, and afraid of what he didn't understand, stirred their fear like coals in a fire. A monster, he said. He's kidnapped her. He'll come for us next. They grabbed torches, axes, and marched toward the castle. Belle tried to stop them. No, he's not what you think, But they didn't hear her. They weren't listening. The castle, once filled with snowball fights and candlelight, now braced for battle. The servants scrambled, the gates locked. And in the tower, the beast stood alone, quietly waiting. Not fighting, not roaring, just waiting. Because what point was there in fighting when the one you love is already gone? But Belle wasn't gone. She returned. She rode faster than the wind, her heart louder than hooves. And when the gates opened for her, when she ran through the halls shouting his name, he turned. His eyes were dull at first. Then they lit like sunrise. Belle. But the storm was already at the door. Gaston fired the first shot. The battle tore through the castle like a wave. But the beast didn't fight to win. He only fought to survive. For her. They clashed on the rooftop, lightning overhead, rain soaking the stone. The beast could have ended it, but he didn't. Even as Gaston struck, even as pain bloomed across his side, he let go, of rage, of hate, of everything that once chained him. But Gaston did not. And that was what undid him. He fell, and Belle reached the beast just in time to fall to her knees beside him. No, no, please, she whispered. Don't leave me, not now. His hand brushed her cheek. I'm glad I got to see you one last time. And then his eyes closed. Belle leaned over his chest, her tears falling silently. The servant stood frozen. The castle held its breath. And then Belle spoke. I love you, she whispered, not with desperation, not with fear, but with truth. And truth, spoken in love, is the oldest magic of all. The final petal fell and the castle lit up like a sunrise. Golden light rushed through the halls. Windows burst open to blue skies. Walls healed. Clocks ticked again. And in Belle's arms, the beast changed. Not just his form, but his soul. His eyes opened, still warm, still familiar. His voice returned, softer than before. Belle? She gasped, touched his face, laughed through tears. You came back? He said. Of course I did, she replied. And in that moment, all the waiting, all the pain, became a story worth telling. They did not marry the next day. They took their time, read books together, danced in empty ballrooms, walked through blooming gardens. He asked questions. She gave answers. She painted. He tried. They laughed. They forgave. And the castle, once asleep, came alive. Years later, Belle would sit in the library, a cup of tea in her hands, watching children run between the shelves. She'd tell them stories about a beast who wasn't really a beast, about kindness that changes people, about how love is never loud, but always strong. And when the night came and the stars blinked above the turrets, she would walk the halls again, hand in hand with her prince. And they would remember the snow, the library, the light, the story that saved them both. And if you listen closely tonight, in your own dreams, you might still hear them dancing in that quiet, glowing castle beyond the woods, where love is patient and stories never end. Far below the waves, where sunlight filters in like golden threads, and coral gardens bloom in silence, lived a girl who dreamed of a world she'd never touched. Her name was Ariel, and she was a princess, not of land or castle, but of the sea. The ocean was her kingdom, filled with music, magic, and moonlit tides, where dolphins sang to the stars and sea turtles told stories older than time. She lived in a palace made of seashells and pearl. Its halls echoed with lullabies, and its ceilings shimmered with the reflection of moonlight above. But even with all the wonders of the deep, Ariel longed for something more, something different. She didn't quite know what it was, only that it called to her, softly, like the surface of the water whispering her name. While her sisters practiced songs and dances for royal concerts, Ariel wandered. She explored forgotten shipwrecks, brushing seaweed from sunken lanterns, gathering trinkets with gentle hands. A rusted fork, a cracked telescope, a music box with a ballerina that no longer turned. To others, these were just trash. But to Ariel, they were treasures, each one a clue, each one a puzzle piece of the world above. Her favorite hiding place was a secret grotto, a cavern tucked behind a curtain of kelp, where bubbles rose slowly and light sparkled through cracks in the rock. She'd sit there for hours, surrounded by her collection, spinning slow circles in the water, singing songs no one else knew. Her voice carried through the ocean like a warm current, soft, curious, hopeful. And she would sing, not just for herself, but for the dream she carried, a dream of standing, of dancing, of breathing the air. And always, always, a face. A human face she hadn't met yet, but somehow she felt she already knew. Her father, King Triton, ruled the sea with strength and storm. He loved his daughters, but he feared the world above. Humans are dangerous, he would say. They destroy what they touch. And perhaps he wasn't wrong. But Ariel didn't see danger. She saw wonder. And in her heart, she knew her place wasn't just down here. It was somewhere between sea and sky. Silence and song. A world waiting to be found. One night, during a storm, she followed the sound of thunder to the surface. There, through waves tall as cliffs, she saw something that made her heart stop. A ship, a real one. Not sunken, not lost, alive. Fireworks bloomed above it, colors dancing across the clouds. Music floated across the sea. And there, standing at the rail, was him, a prince, laughing, alive, exactly like the paintings she had imagined in her head. She didn't know his name, only the way her breath caught in her throat when she saw him, but fate had other plans. The storm grew stronger, waves crashed like giants, the ship began to break. Ariel dove, faster than she ever had before, through debris, through firelight. And when she saw him unconscious sinking, she didn't hesitate. She pulled him toward the surface, one arm wrapped around him, the other slicing through the current like a blade. They broke through the waves just as the sun was rising. The shore was close, a quiet beach, a new world. She dragged him to the sand, gently laying his head down, brushing seaweed from his forehead. And then she sang, softly, a song of air, though she didn't yet have lungs, a song of gratitude, of wonder, of goodbye. Because she knew she could not stay. Humans would see her, her fins, her gills, and they would not understand. So before he woke, she slipped back into the sea, watching from behind a rock as he opened his eyes and whispered into the wind that voice. Back in the kingdom, her father noticed the change. Ariel was quiet, distracted, always gazing toward the surface. He thought it was a phase, until he found her grotto. The trinkets, the paintings, the statue of the prince. His anger came down like thunder. He raised his trident, and with a flash of light, everything shattered. The music box, the mirror, the sculpture she had guarded like a heart. Gone. Ariel said nothing. Not because she wasn't angry, but because her sadness was too heavy for words. And when she swam away, she didn't return to the palace. She didn't cry. She went deeper, to a part of the sea most didn't speak of, where shadows whispered and promises came with a price. There, she met Ursula, the sea witch. Her voice was like ink spilled in water, thick, smooth, tempting. "You want to be where the people are?" she sang. "I can make that happen." All it would take was her voice. Ariel hesitated. Her voice was everything. It was her magic, her memory, her truth. But the prince, his face, his world. She nodded, and in a swirl of smoke and contracts, her tail split into legs, her gills sealed, and pain-sharp, bright pain raced through her body. But when it was over, she stood, shaking, breathing, human. For the first time, she found the shoreline again, stumbled into the world she had only seen from afar. The sand felt hot beneath her feet, the breeze strange in her lungs. Birds sang in pitches she hadn't known existed. And then he was there, the prince, Eric. He found her by the rocks, helped her up, smiled like sunrise. "You saved me," he said, not fully understanding how. She nodded, wanting to say yes, wanting to sing, but her voice was gone. So instead, she listened to his words, his laughter, his music. And slowly, she fell in love. Not just with him, but with being human. She learned to walk, to dance, to eat with forks, though she still called them dinglehoppers in her head. She laughed without sound, smiled without speech. And in return, he began to love her too. But time was short. The deal had a deadline. 3 days. 3 days to make him fall in love, to kiss her, to know her. Without a voice, without a song. And lurking beneath it all, Ursula watched, waiting. Because if Ariel failed, her soul would belong to the sea witch, forever. On the second day, Ariel walked barefoot through palace gardens, watching butterflies land on her fingers. Eric played music by the sea-soft strings, gentle melodies, and though she couldn't sing, she hummed in her heart, hoping he could hear it there. They watched sunsets together, ate dinners by candlelight. She smiled when he leaned closer, but something held him back. He was waiting for a voice, the one he remembered from the shore, the one that had saved him. Ariel's heart ached, because the voice he longed for had always been hers. But he didn't know, and she couldn't tell him. By the third morning, a storm gathered on the horizon, dark clouds, churning sea, and worse still, a shadow had arrived. Ursula, but not as herself. Now, she wore a human face, a disguise built from dark magic and Ariel's stolen voice. She walked beside Eric with charm and sparkle in her words. And when she sang, with Ariel's own voice, he turned to her as if he'd finally found what he was looking for. Ariel watched from a distance, frozen. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her feet trembled in the sand. And for the first time, since trading her tail for legs, she wished she could swim away. But she didn't. She stayed, even when they announced the wedding, even when the sails were raised, even when her time was nearly gone, because some dreams, You love too deeply to walk away from them, even when they break you. That night, as the ship floated out into open water, Ariel stood on the docks, watching the lanterns glow on the deck. The sound of her voice rose into the night, but it wasn't coming from her lips. It was coming from the sea witch. And as midnight approached, Ariel felt the magic closing in. Her time was almost up. She would return to the ocean, not as herself, but as something trapped, something voiceless, forever. But just as the last star appeared in the sky a-splash, Flounder Sebastian Scuttle the seagull. Her friends had followed her. They'd seen the truth, and they would not let her fall alone. Scuttle dove into the wedding canopy, ripping veils. Sebastian snuck beneath tables. Flounder stirred the water below. And in the chaos, the shell around Ursula's neck shattered. The voice was released, and it flew, like music, straight back into Ariel's throat. Her hand flew to her lips. Then, she sang. Just one note. Soft, true, undeniable. Eric turned. His eyes widened. It's you, he whispered. But the sun was rising, and the spell had already closed. Ariel stumbled. Her legs gave way. And before she could say another word, she was pulled back into the sea. She didn't feel the water. Not at first. Only silence and sorrow, and the warmth of the world above slipping away. Ursula rose now, towering, larger than ships, her laughter rolling like thunder. You lose, she hissed, forever mine. But she had underestimated one thing: love. And love never falls quietly. Eric leapt from the ship, seized the wheel, and turned the sails toward Ursula. The storm raged, the sky cracked. And with one final burst of courage, he rammed the ship's broken mast straight through her magic. The sea exploded in light, the spells unraveled, the winds stilled, and the sea witch was no more. When Ariel awoke, she was in the shallows. Her father stood nearby, trident in hand, silent. He had seen it all. How she risked everything, not for power, not for a crown, but for love, real love. He looked at her, not as a disobedient daughter, not as a child, but as someone growing. And then, without a word, he raised the trident. The sky shimmered, the water glowed, and her tail changed into legs. But this time, not through a contract, not through pain, through love, through understanding. Eric rushed to the shore. She stood on her own this time. And when he reached her, she didn't need to speak. They understood everything without a single word. He held her hand. She smiled, and the waves sighed around their feet. They were married by the ocean, her family in the waves, his family on the cliffs. And in between, the two of them, bridging sea and shore, uniting two worlds that had once been afraid of each other. Ariel never stopped exploring. She learned the names of trees. She danced barefoot on stone paths. She wrote songs in languages she had only heard from afar. But sometimes, late at night, she would sit by the edge of the sea, feet in the water, and sing. Not for anyone, not even for Eric, but for herself, for the ocean. For the girl she once was hidden in a grotto of broken treasures, singing to the surface without knowing what waited there. And now, she knew, if you ever feel like your voice is lost, or your dreams are too far away, remember Ariel. She gave up her world to find a better one. She stood without sound and still made herself heard. And even when the storm rose, she did not stop swimming. She followed her voice, and it led her home. Now close your eyes. Let the ocean rock you gently. Let the waves hum in the background. Let the memory of the sea lull you to sleep. Because sometimes dreams take us underwater, just so we can come up for something better. In the middle of a hidden forest, where the trees grew tall enough to tickle the clouds, stood a tower. No door, no stairs, only one window far above the ground. And inside that window was a girl. Her name was Rapunzel. She lived high above the world where no one could find her, no one could hurt her, and no one could tell her who she really was. But she wasn't lonely, not always. She had her books, her paints, her voice. She had songs and stars, brushes and bread dough, braids that stretched across the floor. And she had Mother Gothel, the woman who raised her, who fed her, taught her, told her the world was full of danger. "You are safest here, my dear," she'd say, stroking Rapunzel's golden hair, because her hair was special. When she sang, it glowed. When she cried, it healed, but only if it remained uncut. So it grew and grew and wrapped around her life like the tower's very walls. Every morning, Rapunzel followed the same rhythm. She brushed her hair over 100 strokes. She swept the wooden floor. She cooked eggs with mushrooms from the garden below, pulled up in a basket by rope. She painted murals of stars, suns, and lanterns across her ceiling. She read books about places she would never see. She played guitar. She danced. She talked to Pascal, her tiny green chameleon friend. And at night, she watched the sky. Because once a year, on the night of her birthday, something happened. Lanterns, hundreds, thousands, soft orange lights rising into the darkness. They floated through the air like dreams with wings, always from the same direction, always from the distant kingdom she had never visited. And always, they made her feel something. Longing, wonder, a quiet tug at her heart. "They do this every year," she whispered to Pascal. "On my birthday." Was it coincidence? Or something more? She didn't know, but she felt it. Like a memory trying to be remembered. She asked Gothel once, "Why do the lanterns appear every year, Mother?" "Coincidence," she said sharply. "People waste their time on silly traditions." "But why my birthday?" Gothel paused. Her eyes narrowed. "It's just your birthday." And she kissed Rapunzel's forehead. But the kiss didn't warm her this time. It chilled. That night, Rapunzel painted a lantern across her wall. Big, golden, bright. So she wouldn't forget. Years passed, and the ache grew. It wasn't rebellion, or impatience, or recklessness. It was curiosity. Rapunzel didn't want to run away. She wanted to know what grass felt like under her feet, what rain sounded like on her skin, why the lanterns floated, and why, when she closed her eyes, she sometimes dreamed of a crown. So one morning, as Gothel prepared for a journey, Rapunzel gathered her courage. "Mother," she said gently, "I want to go see the lanterns." Gothel's smile vanished. Her voice turned to ice. "You want to leave this tower? You think the world is kind? Do you know what happens to girls like you out there?" She listed the dangers, thieves, monsters, betrayal, heartbreak. "All of it," she hissed, "will eat you alive." Rapunzel shrank back, not because she believed her, but because fear was familiar. Still, when Gothel left that day, slamming the door behind her, Rapunzel didn't cry. She simply looked at the walls, all her paintings, all her dreams, and she whispered, "Not anymore." That afternoon, the wind shifted. Somewhere deep in the woods, a man named Flynn Rider was running. He had stolen a crown from the castle. He had no plan, just charm, quick feet, and trouble at his heels. And when he saw the tower, he climbed it, looking for a hiding place. What he found instead was a frying pan to the face, and a girl with hair longer than any story he'd ever heard. She tied him up, asked him questions. He was disoriented. She was determined. "I need a guide," she said, "to see the lanterns." He blinked. "What?" "Take me there," she said. "I'll return your satchel." She held it behind her back, the crown inside. Flynn tried to negotiate, tried to joke, tried to lie. But Rapunzel was not as naive as she looked. She had lived her whole life behind walls. But her mind, her instincts, free. So they made a deal, and she left the tower. The ground was warm beneath her feet, each blade of grass a tickle, each breeze like a secret whispered from the trees. She laughed, spun in circles, cried, fell, got up again. Flynn watched, confused. How can someone be so happy just touching dirt? But she didn't answer. She was too busy feeling alive. They walked through fields, danced with strangers at a village fair, ate apples under tall trees, sailed a small boat across a glowing lake. And the more Flynn saw of her, the more he stopped thinking of her as strange. She wasn't strange. She was brave and kind and funny. She sang to children, healed a wild horse's leg, baked cupcakes in a stranger's kitchen. And at night, when she brushed her hair beside the fire, he listened to her hum and felt something in himself, unraveling. But Gothel was watching. She had followed them. And when Rapunzel was alone, she returned like a shadow. "You've been tricked," she whispered. "He's after the crown. He'll leave you the moment he has it." Rapunzel trembled. But she didn't answer. She was starting to hear her own voice now, and it sounded different than Gothel's. Still, the doubt was planted, and Gothel knew it. That night, Flynn took her to the water. They climbed into a boat, and as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the lanterns rose, one by one, flickering, floating. 1,000 stars being born before their eyes. Rapunzel gasped. She had waited her whole life for this. But what caught her breath even more was the way Flynn looked at her. Not the crown, not the hair. Her. He handed her a lantern. She let it go. And as it floated upward, so did something inside Hera wait. She didn't even know she'd been carrying. "I have something for you," he said quietly. He gave her back the satchel, the crown, unasked. No strings. Her eyes widened. And in that moment she understood. This wasn't about the lanterns anymore. It never really had been. It was about choice. About seeing the world for herself. About being seen. But dreams rarely unfold without conflict. And by morning, Flynn was gone. Taken. Captured. Framed. Gothel returned like a vulture. "You see?" she hissed. "I told you. You left the tower, and look what happened." Rapunzel wept. But not just for Flynn, for herself, for every year stolen, for every truth kept quiet. That night, as she brushed her hair, her fingers paused at her scalp. A symbol, painted. A sun. The same sun on every lantern. The same sun from her dreams. And suddenly, her memories shifted. She remembered. Being a baby, in a crib. A mobile spinning above her. Voices calling her name. Her real name. The lanterns weren't tradition. They were for her. She was the lost princess. The memories rushed back like light through a cracked wall. Rapunzel stood in the mirror, bare feet on the stone, hair glowing faintly in the quiet. "I'm the lost princess," she whispered. Her voice didn't shake. Not this time. The paintings on her tower walls, the sunburst symbol, the dreams, they weren't imagination. They were truth. Gothel hadn't protected her. She had stolen her. The tower wasn't a refuge. It was a prison. And Rapunzel was finally awake. When Gothel returned, her voice as sweet as syrup, Rapunzel didn't flinch. "I remember everything." Gothel froze. There was no more pretending. No more lullabies. Only fear beneath her smile. But Rapunzel didn't run. She stood tall. "You used me," she said, "so you could stay young." Gothel reached for her, but Rapunzel stepped back. "No more." That was when the chains appeared. Not magical ones, real ones, iron shackles, secured by the guards she'd bribed, by fear she'd planted. Rapunzel was trapped again, in the place where it all began. But this time, she wasn't the same girl. In another corner of the kingdom, Flynn, whose real name was Eugene, sat in a cell. He had been tricked, framed, separated. But all he could think of was Rapunzel. Her voice, her laugh, her eyes when the lanterns rose. He had to get back to her. Not for the crown, not for redemption. For her. So, with the help of some unlikely Alice, a group of thugs from a tavern with big dreams, he escaped. And he ran, faster than fear. Toward the tower, toward the girl who had shown him what love actually meant. When he climbed through the window, his chest was heaving. "Rapunzel!" But Gothel was waiting. She struck quickly, a blade, a wound. Eugene fell to the floor, breath shallow, eyes wide. Rapunzel screamed. She rushed to him, cradled his head in her lap, tried to sing. But the words came out broken, shaking. She turned to Gothel, tears running freely. "I'll stay," she whispered. "I'll go with you. Forever, just let me heal him." Gothel's eyes flickered. It was what she wanted. Obedience. Submission. She nodded. Rapunzel leaned down. Golden strands lit up around Eugene's shoulder, the magic stirring, her heart pounding. But then, he raised a hand. "No," he said weakly. His fingers brushed her hair, and in one swift motion, he cut it. The golden light vanished. The hair fell. All of it. Gone. Gothel gasped. Her hand flew to her face. She stumbled back. A mirror cracked, her reflection twisted. Without the magic, her youth unraveled. Wrinkles bloomed across her skin. Her eyes dulled, her voice withered. She screamed, a sound that echoed like wind in a hollow cave. And as the last of the golden hair crumbled to ash, Gothel disappeared. Forever. The tower went still. No more chains, no more rules, no more lies. But Eugene was still in Rapunzel's lap, eyes closing. She held his face, tears dripping on his cheek. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please." He smiled. "You are my new dream." And then silence. Rapunzel cried, not like a child, not like a prisoner. She cried like someone who had just lost the one thing they didn't even know they were allowed to hope for. She pressed her forehead to his, and then a single tear fell. It landed on his cheek, lit up like a star, and pulsed with golden light. Just once, and then again, until his wound began to glow, and his chest began to rise. He gasped, eyes wide, alive. "Did I die?" She laughed through sobs. "Almost." He blinked. "Worth it." They didn't climb down the tower right away. They stayed, holding each other, letting the silence settle, letting the past melt into something smaller. Then, hand in hand, they stepped into the forest. No longer hiding, no longer afraid. The kingdom had waited for 18 years. Lanterns had been sent every birthday, prayers whispered, hope never quite extinguished. And when the lost princess returned, the queen knew before a word was spoken. She ran to her, held her face, touched the cheek she had kissed as a baby. Rapunzel didn't remember the walls, or the cradle, or the lullabies. But her heart remembered the feeling, and it bloomed again in her mother's arms. The palace opened its gates, banners flew, the kingdom wept and celebrated. The girl with the golden hair was home, but Rapunzel had changed. She wasn't a delicate doll, she wasn't just a symbol. She was an explorer, a painter, a storyteller. And when she walked through the halls barefoot, laughing, she didn't feel like a princess. She felt like herself. She and Eugene did not rush. They traveled, met people, helped rebuild the places Gothel had hurt. They listened. They learned. And when they married, it was not a royal event. It was a picnic, under the stars, with friends and fireflies and a cake baked by Rapunzel herself. No tiaras, no trumpets. Just love and laughter, and lanterns that floated again, not to mourn, but to celebrate. At night, when the palace was quiet, Rapunzel often stood at her old window. She would light one candle, whisper to the wind, and let it go. Not because she was trapped, but because she was free. And freedom deserves light. So if you ever feel locked in a tower, if the walls seem too high, if someone tells you who you can't be, remember her. The girl who painted her dreams before she ever lived them. The girl who left safety behind to chase the light. And the girl who found in her own courage a magic more powerful than any spell. Now close your eyes. Let the lanterns float above you. Let the silence wrap around you like soft blankets. And rest, knowing the world is still full of windows waiting to be opened. Once upon a time, in a kingdom wrapped in rose gardens and summer wind, a baby girl was born beneath the petals of dawn. Her name was Aurora. She did not cry when she entered the world. She blinked, quietly, as if she was listening to something far away. The queen held her gently, the king wept, and the people gathered for a celebration unlike any other. 3 fairies arrived, glowing with colors that shimmered like sunlight through stained glass. Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. They brought gifts. Not gold, not jewels, but blessings. From Flora, beauty, graceful as a falling leaf. From Fauna, heart that sang, kindness woven into every word. And from Merryweather, a gift unfinished, because before she could speak it, another fairy appeared. Not a guest, not invited. Maleficent. She came like a shadow at noon, tall, pale, eyes like mirrors. Her voice was quiet, cold. She gave her gift, too, but it wasn't kind. When the sun sets on her 16th birthday, she said, she will prick her finger on a spinning wheel and fall into an endless sleep. The room gasped. The queen clutched Aurora tighter. But Merryweather, brave, trembling, stepped forward. She could not undo the curse, but she could soften it. Not death, she whispered, just sleep. Until love finds her, until someone who sees her, wakes her. The king ordered every spinning wheel in the kingdom burned. The fires glowed for weeks. But fire cannot burn fate. And so the fairies did something unthinkable. They took the child, far away, into the forest, to live as a peasant girl, with no crown, no name, no past. She grew up as Briar Rose. Her days were simple. She woke to birdsong and dew, gathered berries in a wicker basket, sang to the wind, danced among flowers. She did not know she was royal. She did not know she was hunted. She did not even know that she was waiting. But something in her heart did. She spoke to animals as if they understood. She watched the sky as if it held secrets. And in her dreams, she saw a face, always the same, a boy, smiling, reaching for her. She would wake with tears she couldn't explain. One day, on the edge of the forest, as she spun barefoot across a clearing, she hummed a melody. Soft, simple, something old, something she didn't remember learning. And someone heard it. Prince Philip. He had come riding through the woods, alone, restless, drawn by something he couldn't name. And then he saw her. Not in a gown, not in a ballroom, but barefoot, laughing, dancing with an owl. He didn't know her name, and she didn't know his, but they danced anyway. Because sometimes recognition happens in the soul before the mind can catch up. When she returned to the cottage that evening, her eyes still shining, her heart still spinning, the fairies were waiting. They told her the truth, the whole truth, that she was Aurora, that she was promised to a prince, that she was to return to the castle tonight. But I just met someone, she whispered, tears pooling. I love him? Flora took her hand. Fauna brushed her hair. Merryweather said nothing. Because sometimes truth feels like a prison. That night, as the castle gates closed behind her, Aurora stood in a golden room filled with people she didn't know. They called her Your Highness. They gave her gowns, jewels, titles, but not choices. She stood by the window, silent, longing for the forest, for the boy. And then, the spell began. Somewhere in the castle, a secret door creaked open. A spinning wheel glowed in the dark. Its needle pulsed like a heartbeat. Aurora moved toward it, eyes glazed, feet light as feathers. She did not scream. She did not speak. She simply reached and touched. The curse fell like nightfall, silent, total. She collapsed onto a velvet bed, golden hair spread like sunlight. The fairies arrived moments later, too late. They wept. But not long, because they had a plan. They cast a spell across the kingdom gentle and wide. Everyone would sleep, not in sorrow, but in peace. Until Aurora woke, no one would feel pain. Time would pause. The castle exhaled, and the world slept. Far away, Philip returned to the woods to find her. But the cottage was empty. No birds, no laughter, no girl, only shadows. Until the fairies found him, told him everything. He was stunned, heartbroken, but not afraid. He mounted his horse. I'll go, he said. I'll find her. And so he rode. The path was not easy. Maleficent knew he was coming. She summoned thorns, brambles that reached for his skin, winds that howled like wolves. He cut through them all. When that failed, she came herself. A dragon, black, burning, huge. He fought, sword in hand, shield cracked. But he wasn't fighting for victory. He was fighting for a promise made in a clearing, for a girl he had danced with without knowing her name. The fairies helped, and with one final strike he won. The spell cracked, the world shifted. Philip entered the castle. The halls were still, candles burned low, and there she lay, eyes closed, face soft, asleep, for what felt like 100 years. He walked to her side, kneeled, not as a prince, but as someone who had never stopped listening for her song, and gently he kissed her forehead. Aurora opened her eyes. The world returned. The kingdom stirred. Bells rang, sunlight poured in, voices rose in joy. But Aurora, she only saw him. Not the walls, not the crown, just the face from her dreams. He smiled. "I found you." And she smiled back. "I knew you would." They did not speak much that day, because some love stories live in the spaces between words. They walked the gardens, laughed softly, held hands. And when they danced again, in a real ballroom, with music and chandeliers, it felt exactly the same as that first dance in the forest. No one watched them. Not really, because their world was only each other. Aurora did not return to the tower. She didn't need to. She had found the dream that had been chasing her all along. Not sleep, not destiny, but choice. She was more than a princess, more than a curse. She was someone who had slept through time and woken up to find herself stronger. Sometimes, our hearts know things before we do. They dream forward, they remember backward. And even in silence, they keep calling. If you ever feel paused, like life is happening without you, remember Aurora. She was never lost, just waiting. And one day, without warning, she opened her eyes, and the world was beautiful again. Now let yourself drift into your own soft forest, where dreams bloom slowly, and peace waits patiently, and someone who sees you is already on their way. The kingdom had been asleep for a long time, and waking up wasn't loud. It was soft. Curtains fluttered, cooks stirred warm pots of stew, children rubbed their eyes and laughed without knowing why. And in the heart of it all, Aurora stood beside her prince, wearing a crown she never asked for, in a castle that once dreamed without her. She didn't feel like royalty, not yet. She still missed the birds, the wildflowers, the sky visible through branches instead of stained glass. She wandered the halls barefoot for weeks, as if the castle itself were just another glade to explore. The queen brought her silk gowns and polished slippers. The king spoke of treaties, of titles, of royal schedules, but the fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, knew better. They left her notes on napkins, brought her acorns instead of pearls, sang to her while brushing her hair. "You're still our Rose," they whispered. And she smiled, because even though the dream had ended, The girl inside the dream had stayed. Philip gave her space. He didn't try to make her feel like a queen. He treated her like someone real, someone who once danced with an owl in the woods. He built her a bench beneath the castle's tallest tree. Every afternoon they'd sit there just listening, to wind, to footsteps, to time itself moving forward again. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. And it was enough. Aurora often walked the castle grounds in silence. She would trail her hands along hedges, dip her fingers in fountains, close her eyes to feel the warmth of sun on her skin. Because there had been a time when she had no control over waking, no choice over sleep, no voice in when her story would begin. Now every breath felt like freedom. One morning, she woke before the birds. The castle was still asleep. She stepped out onto her balcony, wrapped in a pale robe, hair cascading over her shoulder like melted gold. The stars hadn't faded yet. The moon was still watching. She whispered to it, "I'm not afraid anymore." And for the first time, she believed it. Because waking up isn't just about opening your eyes, it's about opening your heart, to memory, to grief, to hope. And hope can be quiet. The kingdom celebrated her return, of course. There were feasts, banners, doves released into the sky. But what Aurora remembered most was a single moment. A little girl, no older than 7, tugged at her dress during a parade. "Did it hurt?" she asked. Aurora knelt, smiled. "No," she whispered. "It just felt like waiting." The girl blinked, nodded, and hugged her. Not like a queen, but like someone who had been asleep before. Not all wounds leave scars on the skin. Some live in the pauses between moments, in the what-ifs, in the time that passed while you slept. Aurora forgave the time she lost, because what she found was still hers. She and Philip did marry, but not because the story said so, not because their love was written in fate. They married because they chose to stay, to wake up beside each other again and again. The ceremony was held in the garden. No red carpets, no blaring trumpets. Just candles, rose petals, and the same song they once hummed in a clearing. Aurora kept some parts of her old life. She still braided flowers into her hair. She still sang to birds. She still walked the edge of the woods, just far enough to hear the wind say her name. But now she had choices. She could speak when she wanted, sleep when she wished, and wake because she decided to. Years later, people would ask, "Did it feel like a dream?" She always smiled. "No, the sleep was the dream. This is waking." Because now, when she danced, she wasn't waiting for a face in a dream. She was dancing with someone real, with a world that had opened like a book left on a shelf too long. And each page was her own. If you ever feel frozen in place, like life has paused without warning, remember Aurora. She lived between breaths, between seasons, between the fall of a needle and the rise of a kiss. And when she finally woke, she didn't rush. She listened. To herself, to her world, to what mattered. And sometimes that's all waking up really is. So now, as you lie still, with your own quiet dreams humming just beneath the surface, know this: you are not behind. You are not late. You are only resting. And the world will be here when you open your eyes again. Sleep deeply tonight. Let the winds of her forest brush against your cheeks. Let the hum of fairy wings settle in your thoughts. Let the dream end gently. Because when it does, a new one begins. And you'll be ready, just like her. Once, not so very long ago, in a city of music, moonlight, and magnolias, a little girl knelt by her bedroom window, wishing on a star. Her name was Tiana. She lived in New Orleans, a place where jazz played in the streets, where fireflies blinked like lanterns in the trees, and where dreams floated through the air as thick as the scent of gumbo on a summer night. But Tiana's dream wasn't for a prince, or a castle, or magic. She dreamed of a restaurant, a place with white tablecloths, a pot always bubbling, and a sign out front that said, Tiana's Place. It was her father's dream first, and now it lived inside her like a flame that refused to flicker out. She worked hard, harder than anyone her age. 2 jobs, long hours, sore feet. She saved every penny in a coffee can, woke before sunrise, went to sleep with flour still on her hands. People told her to rest, to dance, to dream. But she was dreaming. Only, her dream wore an apron and came with a side of beignets. And so she waited. Not for magic, but for a moment. The right time, the right space, the key to open her future. Then came a prince. Not the kind from fairy tales. Well, he was, but not the helpful sort. His name was Naveen, from a distant kingdom, all charm, no job, no clue. He had come looking for jazz, for fun, for a way to escape responsibility. And what he found was trouble. A man named Dr. Facilier with a voice like velvet and shadows that slithered when he spoke. He offered Naveen power, freedom. But like all dark magic, it came with a price. And soon enough, the prince was no longer a man. He was a frog. Tiana met him at a masquerade ball, not as herself, but dressed in a borrowed gown, just for a moment. She wasn't trying to be a princess, she was just tired, and for once, she wanted to feel like her dream was close enough to touch. But when Naveen saw her, he thought she was the key. "Are you a princess?" he croaked. "No," she laughed. "I'm a waitress." But he begged, explained, promised her money, enough to buy her restaurant. And Tiana, tired and desperate, leaned in and kissed him. Poof. She was a frog too. They screamed, they argued, they leapt through windows. And before the night was done, they were lost in the bayou. No ball, no kitchen, just lily pads and mud. At first, they couldn't stand each other. He was careless, she was focused. He danced through life, she carried it on her back. But as the days passed and the fireflies lit the way, something began to change. They met an alligator named Louis, who played trumpet like he was born with it. They met a firefly named Ray, who was in love with a star named Evangeline. And together, they chased a legend. A woman in the woods, Mama Odie. Blind but wise, chaotic but kind. She didn't offer them a spell, she didn't hand them a cure. She offered something better, clarity. "You gotta dig a little deeper," she said. "Don't matter what you look like, don't matter what you want. What matters is what you need." And what Tiana needed wasn't just a restaurant. It was love, balance, joy. A life that meant something, not just to her, but to others. She saw it now, in Ray's devotion, in Louis's joy, in Naveen's eyes, which had softened like river water under moonlight. But time was running out. Facilier was still chasing them, still offering deals, still whispering lies. And when Ray gave his light to save them, he didn't make it back. They buried him beneath the stars. And Tiana looked up at Evangeline, the star Ray loved. And for the first time, she cried not for herself, but for a friend. Naveen was captured, bound, offered as a final deal to the spirits. Facilier laughed. Victory was near, until Tiana arrived, not in a gown, not with magic, just with truth. She saw him for what he was, a shadow with a mask. He offered her the restaurant, everything she had worked for. but she shook her head. "My daddy never got his dream," she said. "But he had love. He had me. And he never gave up." And she crushed the charm in her hand, breaking the spell. Facilier screamed. And the shadows, the very ones he had summoned, dragged him down. The bayou was quiet again. The stars blinked slowly. The fireflies danced in circles. And Tiana turned to Naveen. They had a choice. The spell would only break with a kiss between a princess and her true love. She wasn't royalty, not in name, but love has a way of rewriting stories. And so they kissed. Poof. Still frogs. They laughed, because at this point, why not? But then they got married. A simple ceremony, in the bayou. Just them, the stars, and a promise. And with that kiss from a princess by marriage, the spell broke. They were human again. Tiana got her restaurant, with help, with love, with joy. It was built with her hands but filled with the music of her friends. Jazz on the stage, family in the kitchen, Naveen chopping vegetables without complaining. Much. She named it Tiana's Place. The sign gleamed, the tables filled, the flavors danced. And in the middle of it all, she stood tall. Not as someone who was rescued, not as someone who waited, but as someone who earned her dream. One day at a time, one spoon at a time, one wish after another. Tiana didn't stop working, but she started smiling more, laughing louder, dancing in the kitchen with her apron on sideways and flour on her cheek. Because know her dream wasn't just a place. It was a person, a rhythm, a life. She still looked at the stars sometimes, still whispered to Evangeline, still kept a photo of her father above the stove. He never got to taste her gumbo. But she believed somewhere out there, he was proud. And that was enough. If you've ever been told to slow down, to stop working so hard, to wait for magic instead of building it, remember Tiana. She never waited for a prince. She never asked for a fairy godmother. She stirred her dreams with her own 2 hands. And when life turned her into a frog, she learned how to leap. So if tonight your dream feels far away, know this. Some wishes take work. Some magic comes in moments. But the best dreams, they grow like roots. They stretch like vines. They take time and love. And you. Now close your eyes. Let the bayou quiet your thoughts. Let the trumpet play soft behind your eyelids. Let Evangeline shine. And know, your story isn't finished. Your dream is still simmering. And when it's ready, you'll taste it. Just like she did. Last time, Tiana had found her dream, kissed the frog prince, broken the spell, and opened the doors to her restaurant. Tiana's Place. Now we let the story slow down and breathe. The first night Tiana opened her restaurant, she didn't sit down. Not once. She danced between tables with trays balanced on one hand, greeted guests like old family, and stirred 3 pots of gumbo at once. The music played until nearly midnight. Naveen strummed alongside the band. Louis played trumpet from the balcony, and the guests stomped their feet so loud the floorboards thumped like a second heartbeat. But when the final chair had been stacked, and the candles snuffed out one by one, Tiana stood at the front door in silence. She looked up at the sign Tiana's Place and smiled. "I did it," she whispered to the night. The wind stirred gently through the magnolia trees as if answering, "Yes, you did." She still rose early. The dream didn't stop at opening night. There were orders to place, menus to print, roofs to patch, and a spice rack that never stayed organized. But now, she wasn't doing it alone. Naveen helped. Kind of. He couldn't cook much, but he made a mean coffee. He swept with flair. He folded napkins like he was conducting an orchestra. And when she was tired, he danced her across the tile floor until her laughter returned. On Sundays, she closed the restaurant. She called it her Ray Days, named after Ray, the little firefly who had lit up her darkest hours. On those days, she and Naveen packed a basket beignets, jam, cold lemonade, and took a boat out into the bayou. They floated among the trees, trailing fingers in the water, watching frogs leap between lily pads like little echoes of their old selves. Sometimes she sang, sometimes he napped, sometimes she just watched the clouds move and wondered how it had all happened so fast. One evening, as the sun dipped below the cypress trees, Tiana saw a glimmer overhead. A single firefly, then another, then dozens. And there in the center of the sky shone Evangeline, bright, steady. She's always watching, Tiana whispered. Naveen wrapped an arm around her. She must be proud, he said. They sat in silence, not mourning, not missing, just remembering. The city loved her gumbo, but they loved her story more. Little girls pressed their noses to the restaurant window, watching her stir the pot. Grandmothers asked for her recipes. Boys begged to try frog legs, just once. Some customers came for the food, others for the magic. But all left full, not just in the belly, in the heart. Because Tiana's place didn't just serve dinner, it served hope. But running a dream wasn't always easy. There were setbacks. Suppliers forgot shipments. Rain leaked through the kitchen ceiling. One morning, the flour delivery spilled across the loading dock. White powder everywhere, covered her shoes, her apron, her mood. She sat down on a crate, exhausted. Then from behind her, a small hand reached out. A child, maybe 6, maybe 7. She held out a drawing. Tiana, in her chef's hat, standing in front of a golden restaurant. I made this, the girl said shyly, 'cause I want to be like you. Tiana smiled through tears. That's the best tip I've ever gotten. At night, after everyone had gone home, she walked the dining room alone. She ran her hands along the tabletops, flicked off the lights, and whispered a thank you to the room. It had become a ritual, like brushing her dreams before bed. Some nights, she dreamed of her father. In the kitchen, stirring stew. His sleeves rolled up, his laughter like thunder and sunshine. You kept going, he'd say. You did what we started. She'd wake with her hand on her heart, warm, heavy, grateful. She didn't need to be a princess, but people still called her one, in the way they opened doors for her, in the way they asked for advice, in the way they whispered her name like a legend. But Tiana never let it change her. She still did the grocery shopping, still polished the floors, still wore boots in the rain. The magic wasn't in the title. It was in the doing, in the gumbo, in the joy. In every moment she could say, I earned this. Once a year, on the night of Ray's passing, Tiana and Naveen held a firefly festival in the garden. Children made lanterns out of mason jars. Old musicians played slow tunes on banjos and violins. And at the end of the night, everyone released their lanterns into the sky. 1,000 little stars, some blinking, some floating, all rising. And Tiana looked up to find Ray right where he always was, next to Evangeline. She still had hard days. Everyone does. Days when the gumbo burned, or her shoes pinched, or a review in the paper said the beignets were too sweet. But those days didn't stop her, because she remembered what it felt like to be a frog, to be lost, to be waiting for life to begin. And now life was hers. Not perfect, but hers. Sometimes, when it rained softly and the restaurant was closed, she'd pull out her old recipe book, the one with flour-stained pages and a corner chewed by a mouse. She'd add a new recipe, write the date in the margin. Then she'd close the book, set it back on the shelf, and smile. Because dreams don't stop growing once they come true. They stretch, they shift. They season themselves with every year you live inside them. So if tonight, your dream feels far away, or your feet feel tired, or your hope feels too small to matter, remember this. You don't need to be born into a palace. You don't need a wand or a fairy godmother. You need heart, work, courage, and a firefly or two. You need to believe in the morning after the storm, in the laughter after the tears, in the slow magic that shows up when you don't quit. And one day, you'll open your door, look out at what you built, and say what she did. I did it. And the wind might answer, yes, yes you did. Now close your eyes, smell the gumbo, hear the trumpet in the distance, feel the boat rocking gently in the bayou. You're not behind, you're not lost. You're just simmering, and when you're ready you'll rise, just like Tiana, once, in a far-off kingdom where the snow melted into flower beds and the windows glittered with golden trim. A baby girl was born with skin as white as snow, lips red as roses, and hair dark as night. They named her Snow White. And the queen. Her mother smiled gently when she first held her. But the queen was already fading, and the lullabies she hummed would be the only memories left behind. Snow White grew up in silence, in big halls filled with echo, and in the shadow of a new queen one, who was cold, beautiful, and afraid. Afraid of aging, of being forgotten, of someone younger stealing all the light. The queen had a mirror, not just any mirror, one that whispered back, that showed her the truth, even when it hurt. Mirror, mirror, she asked, who is the fairest of them all? For years the mirror said her name, but one day it didn't. Snow White, it whispered. The queen's face didn't change, but something inside her broke. That very night she called for a huntsman. Take her, she said, far into the woods. Do not let her return. Snow White didn't fight. She followed, through leaves, over stones, into a forest that grew darker with every step. But when the huntsman raised his knife, he paused. She didn't plead. She didn't scream. She looked up at him with eyes full of trust. That was what undid him. He dropped the blade. Run, he whispered. Run and don't look back. And she did. The forest closed in around her, twisting trees, eyes blinking from the shadows, strange sounds, howls, groans, echoes. Branches grabbed at her skirt, roots tripped her. Her own heartbeat felt like thunder in her ears. She ran until her knees gave out, and when she finally collapsed, the forest grew quiet. The trees sighed, the wind slowed, and Snow White fell asleep, curled beneath a fallen log, hands tucked beneath her cheek, just like a child. She was found the next morning by eyes that were round, curious, and very small. 7 pairs of them, belonging to 7 dwarfs. They lived deep in the woods, in a cozy cottage with crooked stairs and teacups that didn't match. They had names like Doc, Sleepy, Grumpy, Bashful. Names that sounded like moods, like songs. They didn't know what to do with her at first, but she smiled, offered to sweep, to cook, to make the cottage feel more like home. And slowly they let her stay. She sang while she worked, talked to the animals who peeked through windows, brushed cobwebs off rafters and found joy in doing simple things well. The dwarfs grew to love her, not because she was royal, but because she was kind. She kissed their foreheads before they left for work each day, waited with warm soup and warm stories when they came home. And for a while, everything felt safe. The forest had become a second cradle. But far away, in the castle, the mirror spoke again. She lives, it said, beyond the hills, in the care of 7. The queen didn't scream. She didn't curse. She simply transformed into an old woman, stooped, wrinkled, voice like cracked twigs. And she made a gift. A single red apple, shining, perfect, laced with sleep. One morning, while the dwarfs were working, Snow White heard a knock. She opened the door and saw the old woman, smiling with too many teeth, eyes watery, voice shaking. "Just an apple, dear," she said, "the sweetest you've ever tasted." Snow White hesitated, but kindness was her nature. She took it, bit into it, and the world slipped away. The dwarfs found her on the floor, still, pale, the apple beside her. They wept. They lit candles. They held her hands, hoping for warmth. But it never came. They could not bury her. So they built a glass coffin, set it deep in the woods, surrounded it with flowers, visited every day. She did not decay. She did not change. She simply waited. Seasons passed. Leaves turned. Snow came and went. But inside that glass coffin, Snow White remained unmoving. Like a breath the world forgot to take. And then a stranger arrived. A prince, lost in the woods, drawn by stories. He saw her through the glass and fell to his knees. Not because of her beauty, but because of something older, stronger. A feeling that said, "I've been looking for you." He kissed her forehead, not for himself, not for legend, but to say hello. And the spell broke. Snow White's eyes fluttered. She sat up. The air smelled like spring again. The dwarfs cried, the prince laughed, and she just smiled, as if waking from a nap into a world that hadn't stopped loving her. She didn't return to the castle, not yet. She stayed a while longer in the woods, gathering herbs, singing with birds, helping Bashful tie his boots. The prince didn't rush her. He returned when she was ready, when she asked, because true love waits. The kingdom rejoiced. The old queen was gone, her mirror shattered, her tower sealed. And Snow White, gentle as ever, walked through the halls she had once tiptoed through. Now, they were hers. She didn't rule with commands, she ruled with presence. She visited villages, learned names, tasted soup from every cook in the land and complimented them all. Children followed her like ducklings. Grandmothers held her hand. And every day, she returned to the garden where the birds still remembered her lullabies. She married the prince, but they didn't build a new castle. They built a greenhouse, a space for wildflowers, for vines to climb the walls, for bees to hum. And on most mornings, that's where she could be found, watering roots, talking softly to tomatoes, wearing no crown at all. If you've ever felt like the world has silenced you, like you're waiting for someone to remember who you are, like kindness isn't enough to keep you safe, remember Snow White. She wasn't fierce, she wasn't loud, she didn't fight with swords. She fought with softness and survived. And when the darkness came for her, she still offered warmth, still opened the door, still believed that people could be better. Sometimes, strength looks like holding on, like brushing the dust off your apron, like singing into silence. And when the world finally sees you, when it opens its arms, you'll rise. Just like her. Now rest. Imagine the forest, its trees swaying gently, its animals curled in nests and dens, the cottage windows glowing warm yellow light. You are safe here. You are held. You are known. Snow White didn't just return to a kingdom. She returned to a world she barely remembered. Tall doors, polished floors, whispers behind curtains, eyes that watched her every move, curious, unsure, sometimes afraid of her softness. But she didn't flinch. She walked through the halls with a basket over her arm and flowers tucked into her braid. She smiled at the guards. She thanked the maids. She brought bread to the kitchen and complimented the broth even when it needed more salt. Because she knew something most royalty didn't. Being seen does not mean being loved. and love is built, not given. She didn't sleep in the tallest tower. She chose a room that faced the orchard, where sunlight pooled in the mornings and the birds sang louder than the bells. She placed the glass coffin in a sunlit glade surrounded by wildflowers and ivy, not as a trophy, but as a memory. She returned there often, to sit, to breathe, to remember the silence she once lived inside. The dwarfs visited often. Grumpy never stayed long, but he always brought jam. Sleepy fell asleep by the fireplace. Happy told the same story 3 times in one sitting. And she laughed, not politely, not royally, but openly, with her head tilted back and her cheeks glowing. They were her family, not by blood, but by choice. And she never forgot them. The people of the kingdom called her the gentle queen, not because she ruled with law, but because she ruled with presence. She walked the streets barefoot in summer, kissed scraped knees, braided little girls' hair at the well. When someone lost a cow, she helped search. When a child cried in the market, she knelt down until they smiled again. And every winter, she brought firewood to the cottages with her sleeves rolled up and a red scarf tied around her ears. She planted a garden outside the palace walls, not just for herself, but for the city. Sunflowers, basil, pumpkins the size of baskets. She taught anyone who wanted to learn how to pull weeds with care, how to talk to the soil like an old friend, how to thank the earth when it gave back. And at harvest time, they all gathered. Long tables, lanterns strung between trees, bread in baskets. Music played softly from fiddles and flutes. She didn't sit at the head. She sat wherever there was room, and that was what made her beloved. But sometimes, the memory came back. Not the pain, not the poison. Just the moment before sleep, that last breath when she felt the world disappear. She didn't fear it, she didn't flinch, but she carried it, like a petal tucked in a pocket, always there, always soft. One autumn, a little girl asked her, "What's it like to die?" Snow White knelt, brushed the child's hair behind her ear. "It's like dreaming, but without the fear." "Were you lonely?" She paused. "I was quiet, but I think the forest was listening." The girl nodded slowly, then hugged her. Snow White grew older, not in years, but in soul. Her voice stayed light, but her silence became deeper. Her laughter came slower, but warmer. She didn't chase things. She let them come, and they always did. When the prince, now her husband, grew ill one winter, she sat beside him for 3 nights. No healers, no potions, just stories, whispers, and a lullaby she hadn't sung in years. And by the 4th morning, he opened his eyes, not cured, but safe. And she smiled as if that was all she ever needed. Snow White never wore her crown indoors. She hung it by the garden gate beside the watering cans. She said it was too shiny for roses, and the roses seemed to agree. When war threatened their borders, she didn't send soldiers first. She sent a letter, written in ink she made herself, sealed with a pressed violet. And somehow, the war never came. Because gentleness, when spoken with certainty, can quiet even the loudest of swords. She taught children how to bake pies. And when they failed, when the crust crumbled, or the apples leaked, she didn't scold. She said, "Sometimes sweetness lives inside the mess." And they believed her, because her eyes made everything feel true. There were no portraits of her in the grand hall, no marble statues, no gold thread tapestries. But there were drawings pinned to the bakery wall, crayon sketches hung in the school, carved initials in a tree near the pond, and whispered stories told by grandmothers as they brushed hair by candlelight. Of a girl who sang to birds, who forgave too much, who never stopped smiling even after the world broke her open. On the final page of her life, she didn't close her eyes with regret. She sat in the garden wrapped in a shawl, hands in the soil. And when her breath slowed, the sky turned peach. The birds went quiet. The wind paused. And the last thing she saw was a rose in bloom. They didn't bury her in marble. They didn't build her a tower. They let her rest beneath a willow tree where the forest meets the field. And each spring, snowdrop bloomed all around. But some say, if you walk through the forest at dusk, and the birds sing something sweeter than usual, and the wind smells like cinnamon and pine, she's nearby, watching. Not with judgment, not with warning, but with love. If you've ever been made to feel too soft for this world, too quiet, too trusting, too gentle, remember Snow White. She made gentleness a language, and the world learned to listen. Now close your eyes. Let the wind pass through the trees. Let the candle flicker just once more. Let the weight fall from your shoulders. You are not too soft. You are just beginning. Long ago, before maps had names, before oceans were crossed with sails, there was a girl on an island who dreamed of the sea. Her name was Moana. She was born into warmth, into salt-kissed breezes, coconut trees that whispered stories, and songs that wove the island together like a net of comfort and rhythm. Her village was Motunui, a place full of laughter, of gardens and fishing nets, of woven mats and steady drums, a place that taught you everything, except how to leave. Moana was the chief's daughter. One day, she would lead them all. She was taught to harvest taro, to bind rope, to read the wind with her eyes closed. Her people were happy. They had everything they needed. Except the ocean kept calling, not in words, not in sound, but in feeling. When Moana stood at the shoreline, the waves reached for her toes like old friends. When she dipped her fingers in the water, the tide pulled her forward, not to drown her, but to invite her. She didn't know why. She only knew that the sea felt like home in a way she couldn't explain. Her father didn't understand. "The ocean is dangerous," he said. "We have all we need here." He built her a life of boundaries, of land, of circles that stayed drawn in sand. But Moana's feet always strayed, to the edge, to the horizon, to that place where blue met sky and something inside her felt more alive. Her grandmother, Tala, understood. Tala moved like the tide slow one moment, wild the next. She danced with stingrays, told stories beneath the moon. She saw Moana's heart, even when Moana tried to silence it. "The ocean chose you," Tala said. Moana blinked. "Me?" Tala smiled, as if the ocean choosing her granddaughter was the most natural thing in the world. And then, the island changed. Coconuts rotted, fish disappeared, the soil grew tired, the people panicked. But Tala whispered, "The ocean is speaking." She took Moana to a secret cave, hidden behind the waterfall. Inside were boats, big ones, canoes meant for the open sea. And Moana, barefoot, silent, touched the hull of one like she was touching her own heartbeat. "We were voyagers," Tala said, "until fear taught us to stay." That night, Tala fell ill. The ocean waited. Moana hesitated. "I'm not ready," she whispered. Tala reached for her hand. "If you don't go, who will?" Then she placed something in Moana's palm, a stone, green, glowing, pulsing with life. "The heart of Te Fiti," Tala said. "Take it across the sea, find Maui, restore it, and remember, You are the ocean's child. Tala passed away that night. But as her spirit left, a swarm of glowing stingrays rose from the water. And Moana set sail, alone, into the dark, into the wide, into the unknown. At first she struggled. The waves towered, the wind fought her, the stars blurred behind tears. She spoke to the sea like it was a friend who'd forgotten her name. "I can't do this," she said. "I'm not who you think I am." But still, the ocean held her up. She met Maui on a distant island. Demigod, shapeshifter, ego bigger than the sky. He laughed at her, mocked her, stole her boat. But she didn't give up. She held on, yelled, pushed, demanded he listen. And slowly, he did. Not because she was loud, but because she was certain. They faced monsters, fought storms, argued endlessly, but they also learned. She learned to sail, to trust the stars, to read the current like a language. He learned to listen, to forgive, to see himself not through glory, but through purpose. She learned that the heart of Te Fiti had been stolen by Maui himself. That the darkness spreading across the ocean was the result of his mistake. He had taken the heart to be loved, to be seen, and in doing so, he had broken the world. Moana didn't run, she didn't judge. She simply said, "Then let's fix it." But when Maui was defeated, when his magical hook was cracked, he left. Flew away on giant wings, alone. And Moana was truly alone again. In the middle of the sea, boat broken, hope thin. She sat in silence. The ocean rocked her. The stars blinked quietly above. And for the first time, she said it out loud. "You were wrong." She spoke to the sea, to her grandmother, to the sky. "You chose wrong, I'm not enough." And then, a light, soft, familiar. A stingray beneath the waves. Tala. Not in voice, not in body, but in presence. "You have come so far," Tala whispered. "I can't do it," Moana said. "Yes, you can." Tala smiled, "because the answer has always been inside you." Moana stood. She climbed the mast, looked at the stars, at the ocean. And this time, she didn't ask for permission. She commanded it. She re-rigged the sail, rebuilt the ropes, spoke to the waves like sisters. Because now she wasn't waiting to be ready. She was becoming. And then she reached Teika, a molten monster of fire and rage, guardian of the mountain where life was stolen. Moana held the heart in her palm and sailed straight into danger. Her boat shattered. Her feet hit black sand. She faced the beast with nothing but her breath and her voice. She looked into the fire and whispered, "I know your name." Because she saw it now, through the brokenness, through the rage. This was Te Fiti, changed, wounded, twisting in pain. But not evil, never evil. Moana walked forward, held the stone to Taka's chest, and said gently, "This is not who you are." Light burst. The mountain softened. Green returned. The world exhaled. Te Fiti rose from the ashes not as a monster, but as a goddess. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She placed a hand over Moana's chest, and the flowers bloomed around her. The heart was restored. Maui returned, his hook mended, his pride softened. He thanked her, not with a speech, but with a quiet smile. Then he left to finish his story on his own terms. And Moana? She sailed home, not with fear, not with questions, with purpose. She didn't just return. She returned different. Her people welcomed her with tears, with songs, with curiosity. And she showed them the cave, the boats, the truth, "We were voyagers," she said. "And we will be again." They built new sails, mapped new stars, breathed new wind. And Moana barefoot at the helm guided them, not as a girl looking for answers, but as a leader who had heard the ocean call her name and had finally answered back. If you have ever stood at the edge of something vast and thought, "I'm not ready," if you've ever been told to stay, to settle, to be someone smaller, if you've ever felt the pull of a dream you couldn't explain, remember Moana. She wasn't chosen because she was perfect. She was chosen because she kept going, because she asked, because she listened, because when the waves knocked her down, she got back up. She didn't wait to be brave. She was afraid and still moved forward. And that is what makes a voyager. Now rest. Let the ocean rock beneath your thoughts. Let the stars guide your breathing. Let the salt wind kiss your cheeks in dreams. You are not lost. You are simply between islands. And soon, you'll sail again. Moana didn't return home as a hero, not in the way stories usually tell it. There were no golden crowns, no statues raised in her name, no horns or parades. She returned barefoot, sun-kissed, salt-drenched, smiling. She didn't walk ahead of her people. She walked among them. Children ran beside her, pointing to the canoe she had rebuilt by hand. Elders held her hands, looking into her eyes and seeing someone older than when she had left. And her father, who once feared the sea, hugged her without words and simply said, "You found your way." Moana didn't speak much those first few days. She sat near the water, listened to the tide, to the whispers in the wind, to the rhythm she'd once only heard in dreams. The ocean didn't call her now. It simply waited. Like an old friend sitting beside her, saying nothing and everything. She taught the village to sail again, not as their chief, not as their savior, as their wayfinder. She showed them how to feel the wind shift before it touched the sails, how to read the stars even through a haze of clouds. She taught them how to lean into fear like leaning into the current, to not fight the water, but move with it. And they remembered. Not because she told them who they were, but because she helped them see they had never forgotten. At night, the fire pit became a map, canoes circled in the sand, lines drawn in driftwood. Families planned new journeys, not to escape, not to conquer, to connect. Moana helped the children carve paddles. She taught them how to listen to birds, to track dolphins by their shadows. She was their chief, but never their master. She walked beside them, always, still barefoot. And sometimes, just sometimes, she returned to the sea alone, not to leave, just to listen. She would push off quietly at dawn, let the current pull her just beyond the reef, where the island faded into mist. There, she would lie back on the boat, arms behind her head, eyes closed, and she would drift. For minutes, hours, long enough for the world to hush. Long enough to remember. She didn't conquer the ocean. She became part of it. She kept the heart of Te Fiti in a carved wooden bowl, beside her grandmother's necklace, and a single shell from the cave where she first chose to leave. She didn't worship it. She didn't need to. The heart still glowed faintly at night, a reminder that life, no matter how lost, can always be restored. Even islands, even oceans, even hearts. When storms came now, the village didn't hide. They danced, because they trusted the sea, and the sea trusted them back. And when the waves settled, new things always washed ashore. Moana sometimes dreamed of Maui, not with longing, with gratitude. She imagined him flying above distant islands, laughing, learning, still trying to figure himself out. And that made her happy, because not every friendship ends with a goodbye. Some end with a smile and a horizon. One evening, an elder asked her, Do you ever wish you stayed home? Never left the reef? Moana thought for a moment, then shook her head. I never left, I just returned as myself. She didn't write down her story. She told it slowly, over seasons, in songs, in sailing lessons, in silence. She didn't need everyone to remember the battles, or the waves, or the monster. She only needed them to remember that they were meant to move. That stillness is good, but drifting is holy. One spring, the children built a small canoe for her, their own hands shaping every curve. They painted it with stars and wrote her name inside the sail. They gave it to her at sunset. And Moana, who had once braved gods and fire and sea monsters, cried for the first time in years. Not from pain, from peace. On her last voyage, she took nothing but water and wind. She returned days later with quiet in her eyes. No treasure, no tale. Just sand in her hair and a whisper on her lips. I remembered something. When asked what it was, she said, how to breathe. Because sometimes we forget. We forget how to rest, how to float, how to sit with nothing but the sound of water. But Moana didn't forget. She taught them. And slowly her island remembered too. If you ever feel caught between two worlds, between staying and going, between who you are and who you might become, remember Moana. She was called not because she was fearless, but because she was willing. She faced the unknown with her hands shaking, and that was enough. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know the way. You only have to listen to yourself, to the wind, to the thing inside you that won't be quiet. The part that says, there's something out there, and I'm meant to find it. So rest now. You are not behind. You are not adrift. You are simply at sea. And tomorrow, the stars will return. The sails will rise. And you, just like her, will find your way. You've traveled far tonight. Through castles and forests, over oceans and rooftops, past towers, spells, lanterns, and back again. Each story whispered something different, but all of them carried a truth. A soft one, a quiet one that sometimes hides beneath crowns and curses. That bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply breathes. Tonight, you met a girl with glass shoes who never stopped dreaming. A girl who sang through the bars of a tower. One who traded her voice for love, and one who kept her word even in silence. You walked beside a warrior disguised in armor, a frog-kissing chef who built her dream from scratch, a queen of apples and kindness, and a voyager who faced a lava monster with only her heart. And now, they rest too. The dresses are folded, the swords are sheathed, the lanterns have dimmed, the world is still. And so are you. If you're still listening, it means your heart is wide open. Or maybe you're already floating somewhere softer, somewhere in between thought and dream. Either way, you made it here. You stayed. And that matters. So take a breath with me now, just one more. Slow and steady. Inhale, exhale. Feel how the night holds you gently now. Feel how the weight has shifted. How nothing needs to be done. You are not late. You are not lost. You are only resting. Like every princess before the next page turns. And maybe that's the real magic. Not the spells, not the dresses, not the crowns, but the pause. The in-between. The moment where stillness becomes strength. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be the bravest or the smartest or the strongest. You only need to show up. Like Cinderella did, one step at a time. Like Moana did, with the stars above her. Like Tiana did, with hands in flower and fire. Like Snow White, with a song for the forest. So wherever you are tonight, in a bed, on a couch, on a train, or simply in your mind, know that this story was for you. Yes, you. You are the listener, but you are also the dreamer, the believer, the child who remembered how to hope. And that's what every fairy tale needs. Not just a princess, but someone willing to follow the story all the way to its quiet end. The stars are fading now. The wind has softened. The curtain has closed. And sleep. Sleep is waiting at your door. Let it in. Let it wrap around you like a velvet cloak. Let it hold your thoughts until they drift into something gentle. Let the final story tonight be yours. No more need to listen. No more need to try. Just close your eyes, breathe, and rest. The story is over, for now.